Hello and welcome to today's Tech Tuesday webcast, Hybrid Cloud Data Protection, Considerations and Comparisons, brought to you by Datalink, a division of Insight. I'm Amanda Sharp, Marketing Specialist at Datalink, and will be your moderator today. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. This webcast is designed to be interactive between you and the presenters. The webcast console you are looking at can be completely customized. You can resize or move any of the windows that you have open. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. All questions from this webcast will be captured. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please visit the webcast help guide by clicking on the question mark icon below the presentation window. The help guide covers common technical issues. I would now like to turn the presentation over to our presenter, Chris Kapusta. The floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Kapusta. I'm a principal architect with Datalink based out of the Dallas, Texas area. And I'm joined today by Mike Morgan, one of our solution specialists around data protection as well as cloud. And as Amanda mentioned, we wanted to walk through today hybrid cloud data protection consideration and comparison guide. So how can I extend my data protection environment into the public cloud to protect workloads that I may be running there? How do I leverage the public cloud to replace things like tape on-prem? So as far as an agenda for today, key considerations for data protection for a hybrid cloud environment, some essential capabilities that we feel you should look for, best practices when comparing these vendors and their offerings. We're going to go through some sample vendor comparisons today. We'll touch on Veritas, Commvault, Rubric, and Cohesity. And then a lessons learned / Q&A session, and we'll open it up to questions at the end here. And again, as Amanda mentioned, feel free to submit questions as we go through this. We'll be monitoring the Q&A panel. So consideration for data protection in hybrid cloud environments. These are kind of questions, concerns that our customers have as they look to move to the cloud, look to leverage a public cloud. First and foremost, how do we protect workloads as they move to the cloud? And can we protect on-prem workloads using the same tool as cloud workloads? How do we avoid kind of data protection sprawl, if you will, and maybe leverage our existing technologies or extend our existing technologies to protect workloads that are running in the cloud and yet keep a simplistic management of the different tool sets. And one thing we like to stress is cloud providers are not responsible for data protection. A lot of them will provide redundancy and data copies between regions, but that's not true data protection. If I delete a file, that deletion gets replicated and that file's gone. Can we move data between public clouds for better availability? Maybe I don't want all of my eggs in one basket from a cloud provider perspective, and how can data protection tools help me move between clouds for better availability, avoid vendor lock-in, whatever the case may be there. And then using public cloud as a long-term archive for on-prem data. It seems very popular these days to try and get rid of tape. How can we leverage cloud and cloud storage for long-term archive? And what can we do with that data once it's in the cloud? Test dev scenarios, disaster recovery in the cloud, maybe leverage the cloud for analytics around that data once it's inside the cloud. So we'll be touching on some different offerings today and different ways that some of our vendor partners are tackling those different scenarios. Essential capabilities as we look to kind of integrate the public cloud, hybrid cloud into our data protection environment. Again, should be able to use the public-private cloud for archive and eliminating tape. We need data protection of native cloud applications, leveraging disaster recovery and test dev in the cloud, moving workloads, and moving workloads not only between public clouds, but maybe from our on-prem private clouds to the public clouds. So best practices for comparing vendor offerings. Extend existing data protection environment with cloud integration. It doesn't have to necessarily be a rip and replace of everything I have on the floor today. How do I extend my existing technologies to leverage that cloud integration? We need to evaluate application support and integration. When evaluating new data protection technologies, we have to confirm that it has the necessary application workload support that you're running either on-prem or in a cloud provider. And plan your data protection strategies before moving workloads to the cloud. Confirm cloud and vendor support. Data loss or cloud evacuation can be costly to the business, and planning data protection before we jump into the cloud or rush to jump into the cloud can help avoid some of those scenarios. And validate cost analysis before jumping into cloud or integrating cloud into my existing data protection strategies. Remember, cloud is not always cheaper. So just a few business challenges that we see from a legacy data protection perspective. Legacy data protection issues, they're complex, they're slow, they're expensive, they're not built for clouds. It's a lot of hardware silos, long RPOs, expensive forklift upgrades, professional services around that, and a lot of them aren't built for cloud today, and we need to evaluate those that are more cloud ready. A lot of our customers and a lot of the market is moving towards the cloud. Many customers have a multi-cloud strategy, and when we talk about data protection in the cloud, it starts to get a little cumbersome and confusing. I have a different interface for every cloud provider. Each cloud provider has their own kind of snapshot or application protection interface that I have to manage. How can I leverage third-party technologies to kind of consolidate that effort and offer better resiliency and redundancy around my data? And as we talked about earlier, cloud providers do offer built-in redundancy, but it doesn't prevent data loss. It's not the same as making a backup, and from auditing or recovery purposes, redundancy does not check that box from an auditing perspective. And then, as I mentioned, multiple cloud environments can increase complexity and data protection challenges. And so protecting cloud-based workloads, as I mentioned, a lot of the cloud providers do offer application-consistent snapshots. Traditional backups are still an issue. Provider tools have multiple different options and interfaces, and unprotected data is subject to data loss. So we need to protect ourselves from these. And I'm going to turn it over to Mike to start talking through some of our vendor partners here, and we're going to start off today with Veritas.
Thanks, Chris. So Veritas is, of course, started their offering as well, and how they are able to use the cloud as a backup target. What they've done, and as they call it, is Cloud Catalyst. And it comes in the form of two ways. One is a standard 5240 net backup appliance, as commonly deployed elsewhere in normal dedupe fashions. There also is an option where you can utilize essentially a railbox with about the same configurations that Cloud Catalyst would have in terms of CPU and RAM for that. You can do a little bit smaller configurations on the build your own, as they call it. You can go down to about 4 terabytes in size versus Cloud Catalyst is standardized at 14 terabytes in size. So there's a couple different options of how this can be deployed. Now, how it's used is in conjunction with any current media servers that you have, and as we see on the slide, that we are able to achieve optimized deduplication between those media servers, so the data that lands on the media servers do not have to be rehydrated before it hits Cloud Catalyst, essentially media server, and then sent off to the cloud. There's also the option too, where you can have some clients write directly backup or directly to it for a backup straight to the cloud. If it was me, and where that would be a decision to whether to decide, do I have a local media server to initially catch that data or send it out to the cloud, would be in terms of your RPO, RTO, and your recovery standpoint. As we have optimized out to the cloud, but realize that it'd be a full rehydration coming from the cloud. So I would always personally recommend that there would be some kind of local way to recover that data, and we're using the cloud as a secondary or tertiary, often at times, way of doing that. As far as the targets right now, the standard targets, whether it's Amazon S3, Azure Blob, GCP Hotline, Coolline, a number of other vendors are supported in that. There are some future releases as to the support of that. in terms of like Amazon Glacier, as well as the deployment of this. One thing that this is a single net backup domain. So this Cloud Catalyst media server belongs to the same domain as these other media servers. There is built-in functionality that is planned for the future to where essentially a error or auto image replication, as is used with standard net backup appliances, will be expected to be offered in the future, but not right now. There's also the ability that this Cloud Catalyst media server can be deployed directly in the cloud instead of having an on-prem solution. And like I mentioned, it would have a similar CPU, memory, and storage requirement to deploy in the cloud, but this is also a way to minimize the amount that we maintain on-prem. And we just are looking for a cheap solution to put something in the cloud, and this is only going to require just a little bit of CPU memory out there. Same amount of storage because we are getting that in a dedupe fashion. It's optimized all the way through, writing through that object storage. We're expected that also in the future that this especially for the cloud version, that this be delivered as an AMI ARM interface or something like that that we expect. Again, this is also in the same net backup domain. As I mentioned, one of the differentiators is that NetBackup is able to use this in a full optimized deduplication. And if I compared that to a standard third-party gateway that may be writing to NetBackup, we may have dedupe going to the appliance, we'll say a third-party gateway that is not Veritas. But because it is a different protocol, that data must be rehydrated before it lands to the Cloud Catalyst server and then is deduplicated to the cloud, and resulting in more LAN traffic and also a longer time because it has to send that data across the wire, across your LAN to this Cloud Catalyst media server, reducing the amount of physical and logical data that we're able to send to the cloud. However, when it's using NetBackup media servers and NetBackup Cloud Catalyst, it's optimized dedupe all the way through to the cloud. So a lot of optimization resulting in a higher amount of throughput being sent to the cloud, both from a physical and logical standpoint. So as far as that covers standard NetBackup in the cloud, what is also available from Veritas is something called CloudPoint. CloudPoint has a couple of different functions. One that we're going to cover right now is how do we do data protection of snapshots in the cloud. And that's what CloudPoint exactly does, is it helps them manage those snapshots, visualize it, and track those different snapshots all in this console. There's no integration right now with NetBackup, so this would be a separate console to view, but it's HTML5, and for what we're hearing, that may be integrated sometime in the future. As mentioned, it's a single UI for all these cloud vendors, so this can monitor an Amazon, a AWS, or a GCP all in one console and interface. And then, as I mentioned, it does use the underlying cloud snapshots and is talking to their APIs. The magic of this is that we're able to see those snapshots and maintain those throughout the way and be able to report them in a single console instead of going to each vendor and each of their consoles to see them. They also can be scheduled as to when we want to have those snapshots done and how we want to track those from a retention standpoint, and then, as I mentioned, the scheduling. So, and as this builds out, we can see how we can decide how we want to best protect those snapshots. Similarly, this console looks very familiar because it's the same CloudPoint, but now we're looking at data protection in the actual data center. That CloudPoint can also, on some arrays, and there's a list of those supported arrays currently, where they can also maintain those snapshots. And for the same thing that we did in the cloud, we also have multi-array support that is built into them. Same thing where the NetBackup is calling those APIs to be able to accomplish this. So essentially, CloudPoint, as a wrap-up, does array-based snapshots, or snapshots for both cloud and any physical on-prem arrays. And then they also will be able to utilize the scheduling and retention just like we saw on the cloud. So it's a unified console essentially for snapshot protection. Net Backup also has the ability to essentially work through an orchestration of how a application, not just a VM, but down to the application is to be tested, whether it's to be cloud or multiple data center. And Net Backup or Veritas uses this. They call it Veritas Resiliency Platform. Right now, as shown here, there's an example of what it would look like for Azure, of how it's built in. But it's a handy tool to be able to not just as in migrate just the VM, but also get down the application and track the workflow all the way through. This can be standardized, and we can have failover, failback, and perfect for DR rehearsals. And next, I'll turn it back over just briefly to Chris Kapusta to cover some of the Commvault capabilities.
Thanks, Mike. So Commvault has a kind of four-pronged approach to for cloud solution, depending upon the work use case. The cloud use case that you're looking to implement. Backup and archive to the cloud, as you can see here. Target cloud storage for on-premise workload. Again, a tape replacement. Backup and archive of cloud workloads native to the cloud, disaster recovery in the cloud, and then migrating data from our on-prem private clouds to the public cloud here. So as we look at using, very similar to the story around Veritas here, as we look at using the cloud as a long-term archive retention, we get deep integration natively with Commvault. We get primary storage savings, tape savings. We still get the storage efficiencies that we would expect when storing that data on-prem, which will help with a lot of those cloud costs, if you will, as we're storing data in cloud storage. Better RTOs, and then again, a long-term tape replacement here using cloud as an archive for long-term data retention. As we look at using Commvault to back up and archive native cloud workloads, again, Commvault has custom fit protection for cloud-based workloads. We can run Commvault virtually inside of the major cloud providers today. We can still take advantage of the agentless backup for kind of seamless data protection. We do have the application-specific agents still available to us, so if we need granular protection of very specific application workloads, that's still available if we're running Commvault natively inside of one of the cloud providers today. It'll help with replication between availability zones and regions. So if I am set up in multiple regions of a cloud provider, Commvault will help orchestrate a lot of that replication and make sure that if I do need to recover inside of another availability zone, that backup data, that archive data is there waiting for me. And I can ensure an SLA around cloud workloads through that integration with Commvault today. And then disaster recovery in the cloud. So cross-platform disaster recovery, any customer, any workload is the way they like to say it. Automated cloud provisioning, so it'll actually automate the process of taking that archive workload that I have inside of the public cloud and actually instantiate that into running workloads if I do need a DR event. I can complete, it's got solution governance. I get full DR reporting with insight and metrics. So if I do need to provide reporting back to the business that I'm meeting my RPO and RTO times and I've got business continuity kind of handled, I have that reporting built in, and it is a multi-cloud solution. So you can choose your own cloud provider. Again, you're not locked into any particular vendor at this point, and I can even do DR to multiple cloud providers if I needed to. And kind of from a workload perspective, this is a workflow perspective, this is what disaster recovery to the cloud would look like. I have my on-premise-based backup and archive data that is encrypted and send it out to cloud storage. And then when the time comes, I can have Commvault actually instantiate those workloads into running cloud virtual machines and bring that environment up in the cloud for true cloud DR. And then migration to the cloud. So again, through the efficiencies that Commvault brings with moving data to the cloud, with the encryption for security concerns and risks, I can use Commvault to actually migrate data to the cloud, cut down on application outages, again, even use it to archive data off, and then similar to a DR event, instantiate that workload and do a cutover to the cloud environment. And then once they're in the cloud, I can continue to use the same Commvault software I have today to protect those workloads, just as I've done when they existed on-prem. And I'll turn it back over to Mike to cover Rubric.
Thanks, Chris. So we're getting into the next generation vendors. We've heard with Veritas and Commvault, the legacy vendors who have been around for a while, but they're continuing to modify and change some of their platforms and grow. And as we start with Rubric, we're getting to those vendors who were born in the cloud and have been around for the past several years and not just 20 years. So let's take a look at how they are doing it, and we'll start with Rubric for right now. So Rubric as looks to their aspect as basically drawing simplicity in our environment, that no matter what the type of servers, whether test dev, production, or DR, the layout, the distribution of how Rubric is in the enterprise is essentially the same. The biggest thing with Rubric is it is down to what they call the brick. And in that would be the licensing, the storage, and capacity that could do that. The difference between Rubric and some of the legacy vendors is how they have the ability to scale, and that is probably the biggest secret sauce that they have of scaling, not just with the erasure-based coding, but how they scale from a file system perspective, how they have search throughout the whole enterprise. And as you see in this drawing, we see a couple bricks, whether one being at a DR site, one being on our primary site that maintains our workloads, and the ability to leverage the cloud from a replication standpoint if we need long-term retentions, as I mentioned about search, or launching VMs or instances there. To dive into a little bit further detail, Rubric also has this capability of being able to tier out their data. You can land their data initially on their Rubric storage, and it can be tiered out. It's a simple sliding scale to figure out, well, how much time do I need to keep this? Maybe it's 30 days on-prem, and everything else is tiered out to the cloud after that. Multiple targets are supported, the biggest common ones, whether GCP, Amazon, or Azure is part of this. They do term this, their cloud archive is called Cloud Out. We'll get to Cloud On, which is next, but this in terms of using the cloud storage as that additional tier of storage beyond the actual bricks. For cloud instantiation or Cloud On for AWS, same reasons why everybody else would want to do this, that you want to be able to test your applications in the cloud. You want to perform any kind of analytics, and of course DR is top of mind. What Rubric will do is convert, even if you had a on-prem DMDK and you're sending that to the cloud, it knows you're sending that maybe to Amazon, and that needs to be converted into an AMI. It will do that on the fly, upload that data to S3, and be able to create that AMI all through the same interface that you would use for on-prem. And then in turn, you can launch that on that EC2 instance. Similarly, on Azure, works the same. The graphics are just look a little bit different, but same idea. We are wanting to spin up those apps, those instances that we had on-prem in Azure. And realize too that this is also covering a little bit of multi-cloud, that if you had instances on AWS and you want to take that over to Azure, you would be able to convert those as well and support that. So, and then think about it, it's the workloads, whether that is, and also think of the targets, that maybe we're going straight to Azure, but maybe we have a local Azure stack. Same things in terms of Rubric, same interfaces, same APIs that it's talking to, same integration, and same console and native feel, no matter what you're doing. Remember, the idea is simplicity throughout all the workloads and the visibility that the single console is doing for the environment. And then lastly, for those things that are also cloud-native applications, Rubric can be installed as a software instance in the cloud to support any IaaS capabilities in the cloud. One of the biggest things that Rubric has going for them is how they open all their APIs to themselves. And so if there are things that the Rubric console does not natively have to be protected, Rubric releases those APIs from a storage capability, and other applications or integrations can be leveraged to use Rubric to hold that data, search it, and do the same archival. So this works, if it's in the cloud, same thing for multi-cloud ideas as well. So the idea is we're providing coverage, whether it's on-prem or in cloud, of those resources and data that needs to be protected. And I think next we're going to roll it over to Cohesity and turn it back over to Chris for the rest of the next-gen backup vendors.
Thanks, Mike. So I'll cover the Cohesity offering here, and from an architecture perspective, for those that may not be familiar with Cohesity's offerings in the marketplace today, much like Rubric, they really they bring about a next-gen data protection technologies, very much a hyper-converged type offering. I put appliances inside of my data center, inside of the cloud. I put virtual appliances kind of at the edge of any remote offices or branch offices that I may need to protect. And I get a kind of single data protection strategy against all of those different use cases. They call it converged data protection. It's a scale-out platform, single UI and API, and non-disruptive expansion. And so, as I mentioned, hyper-converged secondary storage data protection. You can see some of the use cases here. I won't read through all of those, but as I mentioned, there's appliances for the data center, there's virtual appliances for robo and edge offerings, and then there's virtual appliances inside of the cloud to do cloud replication that we'll touch on, as well as native data protection inside of the cloud environment. So Cloud Archive. This is Cohesity's offering around taking backup data that I have on-prem and using the cloud as a long-term data retention target for that archive data. You can see here it's policy-based archival, so I can set policies inside of the UI of how long I want to retain that data on-prem versus how long I want to send it off to the cloud for an archive. Even though it's sitting outside of my 4 data center walls inside of the cloud, it's still encrypted. All the data efficiencies, compression, deduplication still apply. So I'm writing efficiently to the cloud, and I'm using it as my long-term archival. And I'll just let some of these animations build out here so we can see, kind of that workflow. But it's all indexed, so even though it exists, again, inside of the public cloud or even a private cloud, if I want to offload it to an object store or S3 interface, it's fully indexed, so I'm able to, from my kind of local appliance inside of my data center, I'm able to search and find files and VMs that may reside in a public or private cloud archive scenario, and then when the time comes, I can pull those workloads back, those archives back, and restore them on-prem. Or if I have a disaster and need to recover them to a new or different Cohesity cluster, I can pull those down elsewhere in the world as well. And then Cohesity has the concept of cloud tier as well. So using the public cloud, rather than just an archive, just to kind of tier data at the block level off to manage space and capacity on my local system here a little bit more efficiently. So as I set policies around how long data should be culled before I offload that to cloud, as those policies are as those policies start to kick into place, I can see here some of that culled data, and that's just the blocks itself. That may not be an entire archive or an entire backup set, but those blocks are offloaded to a cloud provider. Again, that helps maintain a little bit better capacity efficiency on-prem, so I may not need to expand as often as my backup sets grow, because I can move those kind of longer cold blocks off to an archive type storage. And it is dynamic, so as blocks are requested and become warm again, they are moved back on-prem. And you can kind of follow that workflow here, from a cloud tier perspective. And then Cloud Replicate. So this is taking and using the public or private cloud as a target for replication. Maybe I have an offsite requirement where I take backups, but I need them to exist in a third or fourth location from a business continuity perspective. What Cohesity will actually do is spin up a virtual appliance of their software inside of one of the public or private cloud providers. And then as I set policies around data backup and replication, that'll actually replicate to that interface inside of the cloud. Again, this is a little bit different than kind of long-term archival because I'm not just using it as an object store, but actually using it just to replicate kind of data that already exists on-prem. And then the nice thing is because I'm running the Cohesity software natively inside of the cloud provider, if there's a disaster, I can use it for business continuity to bring DR up in the cloud. Maybe I want to do test dev inside of the cloud. I can start to instantiate these workloads, much like we saw on the Rubric side here, instantiate these workloads inside of the cloud to have running virtual machines. So Cloud DR, Cloud Analytics, test dev in the cloud, whatever my use case is, I can actually bring those backups online as full running workloads. And again, I manage that all through the central interface here from my main Cohesity appliance. And then Cohesity Cloud Edition, so the same data platform we use for the replication, we can also use to protect native cloud workloads. So if I do have applications or workloads running inside of the cloud today, I can instantiate or bring online a Cohesity Cloud Edition, and I can protect those workloads natively inside of the cloud provider. And what's nice, because I have built-in replication with systems I may have running inside of my data center, I can replicate those workloads back and forth. So I can protect my cloud applications natively and replicate them back on-prem for an archive. And then I can take my on-prem workloads, protect them natively, and offline them to replicate them to the cloud for data archive, data instantiation, as well as just having multiple copies of my data out there. So you really get a cohesive, pardon the pun, you really get a cohesive solution, whether I'm running workloads on-prem or inside of a public-private cloud today. So that's those are the four kind of vendors that we wanted to cover today. Wanted to kind of open it up to Q&A. I believe there's a Q&A box where you can type questions directly to us. We'll hang here and see if any questions have come in. But again, feel free to ask any questions that we'd be happy to answer. And Amanda, while we wait for questions to come in, I'll turn it over to you for any kind of last words and closing here.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for attending today's webcast. An on-demand version of this webcast will be available within 2 to 3 days. You will receive an email notification once the recording is available. Thank you again for participating in today's webcast.